Hi, thank you. I'm Dr. Claire Stocks. I'm Head of Academic Practice and an Associate Professor at the University of Chester in the UK. I'm going to be talking about an online escape room that I developed to support induction on a program that I was teaching about a year ago. And probably the most important thing you need to know in the context of this conference is that I'm really an enthusiastic amateur. So I like tech and I like to use tech and get involved in it, but I'm often kind of finding my way quite blindly, and I'm on YouTube looking for how to make things work. And so that's kind of the perspective that I'm coming from. So just to give you a little Sorry, mute myself. Just to give you a little bit of context for this particular escape room. So it was designed to support a program for teachers who were developing their teaching practice. So academic staff who were relatively new into a university, and it was part of a program to help them to develop. And the program was delivered online, and it was primarily delivered asynchronously using Teams. And that was because our participants were dispersed across the UK in a number of different sites. So the university that I was working for at the time didn't have a campus. It had a number of centres across the UK, and now it has centres even more dispersed than it did when I was working there. And those staff also had quite disparate working patterns. So some of them were working just for the university at the weekends. Some of them were just working for the university in the evenings. So their opportunities to engage with the programme depended really on their other commitments. So it was important to be able to offer them asynchronous learning opportunities, and also to some extent to allow them to self-pace because they did have a lot of other commitments going on. Also worth knowing that all of the staff at the university had access to Microsoft 365, so Teams, your normal kind of Word packages, Excel, those kinds of things. So that was I wanted to use that suite of programs to support the delivery of the escape room, because that was the software that staff were going to be using in their day-to-day practice and to deliver their own teaching. So I decided that because the program was being delivered on Teams, I was going to use Microsoft OneNote for my escape room. So hopefully you're somewhat familiar. If not, I'm going to show you a couple of screenshots so you'll see kind of what that looked like as an escape room. And I particularly wanted to use it for induction because you'll see there on that slide, the things that we were covering in induction were not setting the world on fire. They were not the most exciting topics for people to engage with, but they were important topics for people to engage with, to really be successful on the program, to understand what the program was about, and to shift their identity really in terms of the program from being a member of staff at the university to being a student on this program. So part of the process here was getting them to think about who they were, not only as staff at the university, but as learners on a university program. So that was quite an important kind of theme to my escape room that I wanted to kind of pull in and maintain as they progress through the escape room. So that's just to give you a little bit of context. So my rationale for trying to build an escape room was partly about just making induction more engaging, and that's because it was quite dry, but also a lot of our staff were also doing induction sessions for their own programs, which would contain similar material. So part of it was about making the induction more engaging for staff, but also modelling that practice and giving them some ideas for how they could use creative approaches to gamify their own induction processes to engage students from the very beginning. I wanted to introduce them to some educational technology that they can use in their own practice. I wanted to create a clearly structured induction package. So one of the considerations for me in terms of the technology that I use and how I structured the escape room was creating something that people would progress through in a linear way, and I would know where they were up to in that process. And that was one of the advantages of using OneNote, was that I could dip into each participant's escape room. They all had a version of the escape room that I could drop into and see where they were up to, but they couldn't see each other's escape rooms. So it allowed me just to kind of monitor that progress as they went through the induction materials. So I wanted to have that clear structure there for them. I wanted them to be able to study at their own pace, so they could go through and solve the clues and progress through that escape room at a time that suited them, so they could do part of it and then they could go away and then they could come back, or they could go back to earlier sections as well if they wanted to. And that would give us the opportunity to monitor their progress and check their understanding of those induction materials, because what we were finding was staff are obviously very busy. They didn't necessarily have lots and lots of time to kind of engage with materials. So we would think they covered something in induction, and we would find out later in the programme that actually they didn't know something that we thought they knew. So partly this was about checking their understanding and really encouraging that greater engagement with some of that key information that we wanted to present right at the beginning of the programme. So this gives you a sense of what one of the sections looked like. And I'm talking about an escape room, but actually it was a series of rooms. And those series of rooms were the different topics that we wanted the participants to engage with. So you'll see across the top of this is a screenshot of our induction OneNote notebook. And across the top, you'll see that there are a number of sections, and each one of those sections had a different focus. So the first one is introductions and cohort building, then it's learning about the module, then it's learning about how to use literature and reference. Then it's engaging with key student policies. So they would progress through these sections, and each section would have a code, and you'll see that, a clue to a code which would unlock the next section. So they would solve a particular clue related to the material in that section. That would give them the code to open the next section, and then they could progress through the escape room in that way. There are a number of benefits to OneNote. So it was obviously a technology that our staff had access to use in their own teaching. So that was one consideration. You'll see in these couple of screenshots that I've got that there's opportunity to embed a range of media. So you can put photos in, you can put documents in, you can put links out to other materials in there. So it's a way to create quite a rich experience for participants by embedding all of that different media. I could see their notebooks. We could embed the escape room into Teams so that our participants didn't have to go out of Teams where we were delivering the main body of the postgraduate certificate. It would appear in their Teams space so they could engage with it there. So there was a number of kind of benefits, particularly to using OneNote, that made it seem like it was a really good option for the escape room. And it's quite fun because you can kind of play around. So that's a photo that I took myself. I quite like, when I'm out and about, I like taking photos of interesting things to use in teaching. So I've got all sorts of photos that I use for different things. And it's quite nice to kind of personalize things there as well. So just to give you a bit of insight into a couple of the other sections. So the first one here is the first section where we were asking people to introduce themselves. And again, I had a play around online and found things like software that would generate kind of fake text conversations. So I could drop that in. I could answer frequently asked questions through these little, screenshots of fake text conversations, or generate little tickets. So I can create a real theme of, here's your ticket to the program. This is where you become a student on the program, and there's a bit of a kind of exit at the end once they escape from the OneNote. So you can have a little play around with some nice media in there. You'll see one of the things that's really consistent is where I've put in a clue to the code. So each of the sections has got this little kind of blast sign, and that's where the information about the code is. So it'll say like the question to reveal the code is in the last slide of the presentation that you're going to click into. So they would watch the presentation. The final slide is a question that would make them think about what they'd just seen in the presentation so they could solve that code and move forward. So it's quite a lot of work to create, but it's quite nice work. It's creative work. It's fun work, thinking about what that journey looks like through the OneNote class notebook. How it went, I was pleasantly surprised. I was slightly terrified when I started doing this because as I said, I am a kind of an enthusiastic amateur. So getting to grips with how to do this and embed it was quite a big task. But actually it worked much more smoothly than I thought it might have done. And I'll kind of come back to that as a learning point. But there's a few quotations here from some of the participants who did it. And I think some of the things that come through are their enjoyment of the task. They did really enjoy it. They found it really engaging. Even people who were familiar with the technology and using it in their own teaching, they found it an innovative way to use this technology slightly differently to engage students. They appreciated that self-paced ability to come back and engage at times that suited them. And they did develop a really kind of good understanding of how it was helping them to embed that knowledge. So they're talking about, actually, when I had trouble with codes, it encouraged me to go back and think about, well, where is this code? Have I fully understood this? So people were going back and checking and getting that satisfaction actually from cracking the codes and moving on to the next section. So participants, I thought they might resist it a little bit, but actually it was the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. And then some lessons learned. I think make sure that participants are collecting codes and keeping them so that they can come and go. OneNote does provide the opportunity to go in and unlock pit sections as well as the person who is kind of overseeing it. So you could go in once everybody's finished and just remove all of the locks so that people can go back and engage with the stuff. I think for me, because it needed to be really structured, having a plan before I started about what those sections would be and what order they would appear in and what that journey looked like was quite important. I think provide quite clear instructions. I produced lots of screenshots so that people could see what it was going to look like and how to engage with it. Take the opportunity to make it immersive or innovative or themed. I think that really worked, that there's that journey through the different sections. I had lots of people try it out for me and get as close to that student experience as possible so that they could check where the issues might be. So I'd spent quite a bit of time troubleshooting and just checking that it was going to work. Try to talk to someone who's done it before. I had a lot of advice from a colleague who had done this stuff before and it made a big difference. And then I think when you're thinking about questions to create codes, I would say be as clear as you can, because there were a couple of them that I had to go back and refine just to make it really clear what the code was going to be. So that's a really quick whistle stop. There are some links and resources, but I've put my slides into the Padlet, so people should hopefully be able to go in and click through if they're interested in following up.
Hello, everybody. For me, it's still good morning, but I think for some of y'all, it might be good evening, good afternoon. So my name is Megan Condis, and I'm here to present on the idea of having students designing game escape rooms as an assignment and the kinds of skills that doing that can allow them to practice, and also to share with you some examples of work that my students have done. So just a little bit of background about me and the program that I teach in. So I am at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas, and I teach in the Game Design and Culture Certificate program, which we just as a department voted to transition into a minor, and hopefully it can grow even further from that into a major. So we are in a college of media and communication. So this means that our program is not full of hardcore computer programmers. I like to joke that I teach people baby's first programming, where you're starting to think in computational ways. You're maybe setting up conditional statements and learning about like variables and things like that, but typically using kind of engines that don't require you to actually write code on your own. And our goal for the certificate program is to teach students about the ways in which interactive storytelling of all kinds is becoming embedded in a variety of different industries. So, of course, the video game industry, but also the way that we see film and television being constructed into these kind of multifaceted cinematic universes that have kind of a choose your own adventure style way of navigating through them and that require people to go afield into other mediums in order to get the whole story. We can also think about advertising and PR integrating interactive components into campaigns and encouraging people to kind of participate actively in campaigns. The one I'm thinking about recently was like there was a Super Bowl commercial where you could do like a choose your own path through the commercial recently, or even things like event planning or the development of themed spaces. So things related to restaurants, casinos, theme parks, or just places where people, museums, um, memorials, places where people are being encouraged to interact with a physical space and to use their kind of navigation through that space in order to learn or in order to have an entertainment experience. So to that end, our program focuses both on digital interactive storytelling and on analog interactive storytelling. The escape room design activity that I'm going to be presenting today is part of a class called Designing for Play, which does focus primarily on analog play. So we have a unit on sports, we have a unit on board games, card games, and tabletop games, and then we have a unit on themed spaces, including escape rooms. And the assignment that I want to talk to you guys about today asks students to work together in groups to create a design book that would be used by an escape room operator. So we toyed around with the idea of having students kind of build out these spaces, but it quickly became apparent that the budget was just not there for students to be able to acquire all the kind of props and materials that they would need. And so instead we decided on having students take kind of like a blue sky approach to designing an escape room for a client. So imagining that an escape room operator wants a new series of puzzles and a new room, and you're going to propose the room and you're going to give him a book that's going to step by step walk that escape room operator through how they would build this room out. And so that design book would include kind of several parts. And that's why I think this is great for group assignments. Our program has people that come from all over campus. So we have the engineers, computer programmers, we have people from the College of Visual and Performing Arts, we have people from our College of Media and Communication, from like advertising, PR. And so everyone brings their own skill sets to this project. And so this design book can be kind of broken up and people can find their strengths. So the first part of the design book is an outline of the room's story. And here we have the students lay out the contingencies for a successful escape and an unsuccessful escape. So what happens in the storyline if they make it out or if they don't. We also have students write an explanation of the room's theme, and we have them do a little bit of customer research in terms of what IPs might be involved, intellectual properties that they think might be a big draw. What kind of genre do they think that they want to position this room as a part of? Is it going to be fantasy themed? Is it going to be horror themed? Is it going to be, tied into some sort of intellectual property? And again, here we tell them like shoot for the stars. Don't worry about, will Star Trek let me like buy their IP? Just pretend that they said yes, right, and go for it. But the goal here is really more for them to be able to make an argument as to who they think their room's going to be appealing to. What is the target demographic for their room? Is this for kids, birthday parties? Is it for bachelorette parties? Is it for corporate retreats? And like what theme is going to fit with that group the best? And they have to do some research in order to back up those claims. The next part is the step-by-step guide to the setup and the solution of each puzzle. So imagining working in an escape room and having to be able to reset it each time, knowing what the room is supposed to look at when the client first walks in, and then walking people through what would be the steps to solve each puzzle, and also how are the puzzles interrelated with one another. So is there a specific order that they need to solve puzzle A in order to get the clue that is required for puzzle B, and like what is the kind of interlocking structure of those puzzles? Part of that is going to be a map of the room that details where the important puzzle pieces can be found. So again, just helping with that setup to say, make sure that you return, the password, you put it back into the tube where it was originally hidden. But also a lot of escape rooms, as I'm sure everyone in this space knows, often aren't necessarily individual rooms, but might open out into multiple spaces. So like, how is that unlocking sequence going to work? And then last, we have an inventory of any important props that the escape room operator would need to purchase. I provide them a list of online vendors that kind of sell pre-made props, or sometimes students have been kind of inventive in taking existing objects and kind of turning them into puzzle elements. And so like, what would the escape room operator need to gather to make this thing work? And then also a lookbook that would help business owners decorate the space. So they don't necessarily have to detail like every rug and every painting on the wall, but they should give a sense of the flavor of what the room might look like by creating kind of like, I think of it as like a Pinterest board that showcases color schemes and maybe I've had students submit like a playlist for the kind of music or the kind of sound effects that might be involved in the room, or the kinds of props that might set the stage for the story that they're trying to tell. So the kinds of skills that this teaches, and I really do think, so for me in a game design class, it's like we're teaching the principles of game design, but I do think that this activity could be of use in a variety of different classes. So first, from the game design perspective, escape rooms are levels. And so they have students thinking about progress and obstacles and the ways in which players have to attack puzzles in a particular sequence. And so having them have to kind of plan that out and think about what kinds of skills do the earlier, easier puzzles teach that then can be built upon and implemented in the later puzzles to create an escalating sense of challenge is really useful. And I've seen those types of principles then when they take a digital kind of game design class later on, they have a good sense of, how do I make a tutorial, and then how do I make an introductory level, and then how do I make an advanced expert level? It's really useful. Also, just in a kind of more fundamental way, puzzle making is an exercise in information infrastructure and organization. So if you were teaching a class and trying to teach students skills about how to organize information, how to present information in a logical way, then a lot of the work that they have to do in putting together this design book is useful there. It's also an exercise in technical writing and also in kind of visual information presentation. So they're making things like flow charts, they're making maps, they're making kind of step-by-step instruction manuals to teach people how to set up and how to solve these puzzles. So if you were just in an English class, a rhetoric class, a technical writing class, I think this activity could be of use to you. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of our students come from the College of Visual and Performing Arts, and they have backgrounds in theater and set design. And so the talk about theming and decoration is a good exercise for them to be able to kind of exercise their skills as looking into what kind of props would we need to acquire, what kind of resources or what kind of places might we search for props that fit our set theme. And then lastly, if you have students from more of like a business background or an advertising PR background, the section in which they're engaging in research into popular trends and demographics is a great exercise for them to be able to say, we picked this particular theme, not just because we enjoy horror, but because we did research and we found that, the top, I'm making this up at the top of my head, but like, they would have to do some research to say, well, what are the most successful escape rooms, or in the region where we want to build the room, what would be a good tie-in to existing activities, or what age demographic are we searching for? And doing that research and that presentation of research and argumentation is a really worthwhile activity. So I wanted to conclude just by showing you a few examples from student work. And I actually put on the Padlet my prompt and my rubric that I use for this activity, as well as 2 full student design books. But I pulled just some samples of what I think was pretty interesting and effective work. So I wanted to first show you what like a flow chart might look like that helps kind of illustrate what puzzles lead into what activities. So you can see this is a fairly kind of linear escape room plan that a student created. However, 2 of the puzzles kind of unlocked two different parts that would be put together for the final puzzle. So it had a little bit of, the initial portion, you had to do one thing that led into another, that led into another. But then as the participants would go through this proposed escape room, they would also be acquiring parts for this kind of final cumulative big puzzle. And this was like a magic themed puzzle. So they were basically putting together spell components that then they would put together into a giant cauldron to like create the final super fireball spell to unlock a safe, which was very fun. Uh, this is from the same puzzle, so we have a kind of breakdown of an individual prop and how it would be used. And this was a prop that was dreamed up and invented by the student. So they imagined kind of transparent sheets that had these different spell glyph components that if you shined light through them via a projector that was disguised to look like this kind of recipe spell book, then it would project onto the wall. And so you were supposed to combine multiple of these glyphs together to create a specific shape. And if you shined that shape onto some sort of sensor on the wall, then it would know you've created the correct spell and it would open up something. So I thought that was really clever. This is from another escape room, which is kind of like a murder mystery mansion themed escape room. And it's just an example of a map that students were able to generate. And you can see with the key, they combined it with the inventory and it kind of lays out where doors are, how you would kind of navigate the space and where important props are that would be useful for individual puzzles. And for this room, they also created what I thought was a really great lookbook. So they just assembled a lot of art. And this would also be, if you are interested in having students experiment with AI or with image generators, they could do that for this. But we just kind of talked about pulling together a collage of interesting images and having that be kind of inspiration for the set designers of a particular room. So as I said, it goes on the next one. Yeah. As I said, my prompt, my rubric, and my two kind of sample student design books are available in the Padlet. I saw a question come up on chat. I'm not exactly sure how to get to that from here, but they're labeled with my name. So please feel free to use and share. And I'd also be happy to share my contact with anybody if anyone would like to chat further about the possibilities of implementing this in your class. So thank you for letting me share, and I hope you enjoyed my students' work.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Sarah Campbell. My background is in psychology and as a psychologist. And during my PhD, I was looking at how to use sort of music and creative methods to improve well-being, and developed a music-based listening intervention to basically improve emotion regulation. And I was working at the time as well as head of wellbeing in a small private university. And as a psychologist, we have very traditional ways of delivering therapy. And I think I saw that really didn't work for a lot of students, particularly the sort of boys, young men who were coming into the university I was working in. And so I became interested in how could we use other approaches to really develop psychological skills. And that led me down a path of establishing a serious games company after my PhD, which is something I sort of do on the side. And it's really taken me down a route of less psychology lecturing and increasingly working in universities focused on developing personal and professional development programs for students. And it's funny because often when I meet other people who do that, they groan about having that as their role, whereas I get really excited about it. So today I'm going to tell you about an escape room that we've developed, which was really, at the time I was working at a small engineering university, and there was a lot of focus about how engineers in the UK were graduating with the technical skills but didn't have the sort of professional skills. So I'm going to tell you about basically our escape room that we've developed. So often people say, what are soft skills? In the workplace, they're often called transferable skills. Now, increasingly, they're called life skills. Having spent probably an unhelpful amount of time looking into what are soft skills, here is a list which is not exhaustive, but tends to draw on the ones that most people are referring to. But I find one of the challenges in this area is that there's not a consistent understanding of what soft skills are. But I'm really talking about the sort of skills that don't often get formally assessed and that, are often things that really all students should be developing.
Sarah,
And
I lost your slides. Is it just me? Maybe lost your share, or maybe it was just my screen.
They've gone for me. Just
Okay.
That's strange. I will just
They were
share
there.
again then.
Yeah.
There we go.
back.
Thank you. Yep.
Great.
We're good. Thank you.
Yes, so we also needed to kind of defend why we felt there was a case for really focusing on soft skills and make this part of formal assessment. And so as I was looking, there was an awful lot of literature about actually the adult workforce lacking these types of skills, and also the link between, if you don't have these skills and you aren't thriving in the workplace, how that can really contribute to feeling disengaged and unmotivated, and then the sort of financial costs of that for the workforce. And then when we were looking at the literature around whose responsibility is this, should we be focusing on higher education, we found that actually people, in a consistent number of surveys, employers felt only 6% of school leavers have these skills. And that whilst adult training is largely falls on workplace training, there was a decrease in workplace training over the past decade. Much of it was rated as ineffective. And that actually, looking globally, UK workforce graduates and entrants were really not prepared in terms of professional skills and were rated really poorly compared to other countries. And this was also in the context of COVID. And we were hearing consistently from a range of employers in different sectors that what they were seeing as a result of COVID, where people were working at home, graduates who within about 18 months they would have expected, just as a function of being in the workplace with other people, to be developing these skills, that they really weren't developing them. So after 18 months, as they came to the end of their sort of graduate programs, they still lacked in this area. And also it was in the context of, as AI and automation were taking off, lots of reports saying that 50% of the workforce would need reskilling by 2025, which obviously now. So we felt this was a really important area that we wanted to look at, and we wanted to do something really intentional in our programs for our students. So we wanted to look at how could we effectively prepare students for the workplace through intentionally developing soft skills and making that really explicit rather than part of project-based learning or any other type of learning that they were doing in their programs. And this was really to help demonstrate that our students didn't lack these skills. And what I would say is this is an area that's been talked about a lot in the last sort of 5-6 years, but actually we found evidence going back 2011, 2012, 2014, that this lack of soft skills in graduates was identified by employers in the UK as a real issue. And so we were looking at what had been done in the last decade through project-based learning and other approaches to address this, and really finding that this wasn't the case. And so we felt new methods are needed, and that's one of the reasons we took a game-based approach. It's really nice talking to an audience that's already believes in these approaches, which is not how it usually is. But we know that game-based learning promotes effective learning and retention. We know that this sort of immersion and cognitive load means that people more closely match everyday behaviour, so they're not saying what they think they should say. And we also were looking at, evidence that traditional training and sort of workshops and things like that, 85% is forgotten after 14 days. So we needed to make a case for why we're taking a game-based approach, and this was the case we built. So we decided on a virtual escape room, and we decided that the framing and contextualizing was really important. We started off, we just made the escape room, we didn't sort of top and tail it, and we found that some students were a bit confused and weren't drawing the meaning. So we decided to frame it in that sort of organizational workplace focus. And basically we got them to discuss organizational culture, strengths and weaknesses, then to assign sort of choose one they wanted to work within and define what leadership and team working and decision making looks like in the culture they've chosen, and then basically assign roles, which was intentionally ambiguous at this point. So we got them to really start talking in really specific terms about, when we say good communication, what does that mean as a behavior? What does don't interrupt look like? How are you going to do this as a group? And we found that was where students most needed guiding and prompting to really translate the sort of general skill into a really specific behavior. And then they play the escape room. So we have 5 rooms. It's been iteratively developed. We did have 6, then we had 4. We've settled on 5, this 5 being the optimum. And we intentionally designed it to feel pressured, to elicit a sense of failure at certain points, because we felt that was something students really don't encounter and something that employers felt they needed to develop. And we designed it to make intentionally uncertain. And then after they do the escape room, they reflect on the experience and take learnings from it. So broadly, the aim of these sessions is to reflect on leadership and teamwork and how that operates, not just on an individual level, but based on the culture that you're working within. And so we expect students to have some team building, have a bit of fun, but really start to understand how their personal behaviours and decision making takes place with others, but how these are affected when there's a sense of pressure. Get some understanding about their communication style, but also others and how those work together, and take away key things about how they work with others, how they manage pressure, failure, ambiguity, and how to make better decisions. So it's all framed as in, we all perform well when things are going well, but actually when things get tough, what do we do? And how can we get a better understanding of how others respond and how to work together in that? So to design the escape room, we looked at the theory around factors affecting decision making under pressure, and there are these 6 factors. And so what we've done is we've basically, in the workshop experience, the students define their organizational system, their teamwork, and their individual factors. So that's where they've got sort of agency. And then the escape room was designed to manipulate in each puzzle the workload, the time pressure, and the problem situation complexity. So what it looks like is you have these facilitated discussions, they get split into groups, they define the culture, their ways of working, and then their team roles. They then go into the escape room, and the 5 puzzles elicit specific soft skills in each one. So the first one is about risk and decision making. The second one is a creative thinking puzzle. And both of those are quite easy, and it lulls them into a false sense of security. Puzzle 3 is then intentionally much harder. And that's the point at which it's been designed so that all groups fail, but really taps into teamwork, strategic planning. And then that means puzzle 4 gives an opportunity to look at how they respond to failure and their communication. And then puzzle 5 really focuses on critical thinking, problem solving, and negotiation. And then the outcome is whether they escape or not. And when we first did this, and some groups escaped, we found that once they escaped, they sort of didn't engage with the reflection. They were like, we did really well, we don't need to reflect. So what was built in now is that nobody escapes. So either your score is too low for you to escape and the AI traps you in the building, or you perform so well that the AI decides you're too valuable to release and traps you in the building. And it's been really interesting to see how much more groups engage then with the reflection. And then there's the facilitated discussion and the key learnings they take away. So I wanted to show you a little bit. It's basically a web-based game. So I'm fortunate enough, I do have software developers in my team. So we built it in Unity. It's hosted on a website, so it's really easy to access by anybody. And you can access it on any device in any setting, although we tend to, when we run it in person, have it on big screens and teams sort of form around that. We have also run it remotely as well. And we've built it as a really simple point and click game so that you don't need to be a gamer to be able to be the game controller. And as long as you can type and use a keyboard and a mouse, then you can be the game controller. And we found that was really important. And we've also built it so each puzzle is quite different. So anyone that's done escape rooms sort of out in the world isn't advantaged in any way. So we have a range of kind of puzzles in there, and they all work in slightly different ways with different mechanics. So far, we have used it with groups ranging from 5 up to 70 people. And we've played around with different group sizes, and we've found that once we get above 10, it gets a bit challenging. The maximum we've done it with is 14. So like when we've had 70 people, we break them into smaller groups of 10 and run them all at the same time. So far we've run it with 38 different groups, and that's for a real range of disciplines. And we've also run it on international leadership and development programs with multicultural student groups. So we know that language isn't a barrier, and we've seen how it works kind of with an established cohort, but also with a new cohort that have never met before. And it can be really powerful for a sort of initial icebreaker group building activity. We've run it at different higher education institutions. And what's so fascinating for me running it is that every time we see different behaviours in the groups, but we consistently see that groups that manage to engage, don't try to game the system, stay calm, are considered and respectful, always come out on top, which is really reassuring that it's doing what we want it to do. And as I said, it's been iteratively developed across 2 years. So we've refined it with a lot of feedback and done some co-production. So have it at a point now where it sort of works really consistently. We're really reassured by the fact that 94% said they would recommend the workshop to their peers. And what's been really interesting is we've had some really good positive feedback, but it's also been really interesting where our feedback has given students an opportunity to talk about how deflated they feel about failing and how that's just not something that they're used to. And also because we've built in ambiguity and misinformation, we've also really noticed how some students, particularly at high performing universities, are really resistant to looking at where they had responsibility for failure of tasks and instead tend to externalize it and blame it as something on the game, which is interesting. But we've definitely found that this way to talk about soft skills has been much more effective for our students than when we did more traditional workshop approaches. And it also makes it much more meaningful because they can directly draw on experience that they've just done in the escape room when looking at in the discussions. So our key learnings is that really the value of experiential game-based activities to create the sufficient psychological safety for our students to explore and to play and to take risks and to talk about some of these skills and behaviours that are quite exposing. And we found it really enables students to step out of their comfort zones in a way that wasn't happening before, and particularly enable quieter students to feel that they can have a voice and contribute. And this really comes from the opportunity that it offers to uncover the group dynamics, and that students find this a really key learning opportunity, but particularly the ones that don't often contribute to group discussions. And because we've intentionally built these sort of soft skill requirements, as well as constructing the experience to draw on these soft skills, it makes the reflections much more meaningful for students because we can explain the design behind it. We find that setting up multiple groups and then competing really boosts engagement. And again, as I said, no one escaping really means people engage with the reflection. And consistently, we find a real resistance to failure in our students and wanting to explain it away as something to do with the game rather than themselves. And that's where we really have to focus the discussions afterwards. And we've seen every team is different, but because of the clear patterns, we're now getting into a model where scalability is really possible and we can train up other people to facilitate, which is really great. And we found, as I said, the importance of framing the escape room within a wider learning experience, and the meaning that's made in those pre and post discussions is really important. And I think the final thing is we've run it in person, hybrid, and also remotely. And in-person and remote work, but hybrid just doesn't. We find that the people online just get absolutely left out. So yes, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure to get to talk about it. And if anyone wants to talk further, please get in touch.